Hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Deborah Garlick from Henpicked Menopause in the Workplace and author of the book Menopause, The Change for the Better. And as many of you may know, this year's theme for World Menopause Day is Cognition and Mood. So I'm delighted that we've invited back one of the Henpicked's favourites, Jackie Lynch, registered nutritional therapist. How are you doing, Jackie? Jackie can, hi there. Jackie can tell us all, and we've had a fascinating conversation about this, Jackie, about how our food, nutrition can actually affect our mood, can improve our mood, manage some symptoms. And so I'm really looking forward to your expert top tips. But when we talked about this before, and when we decided on the idea for this session, I was actually of the mind of, actually, can it affect our mood that much?
Oh, yes. Yes, it can make an absolutely huge difference to the way that you're feeling. It's really important to recognise that our body essentially relies on all manner of different nutrients for all the different systems, and the brain and the nervous system is no exception to that.
Right, the brain and the nervous system. So are you telling me the things that make me feel happy are probably, because we all know, Jackie, I do like my cheese puffs and I do like my chocolate ice creams. So that's what I would call feel-good food. But I've got a sneaking suspicion that that's not actually the answer.
Not really, because it's going to be pretty short-termist. When we're talking about good mood food, what I'm really thinking about is you feeling stable and generally happy and generally cheerful and upbeat most of the time, not being prone to mood swings, not struggling with low-level anxiety, that sense of feeling overwhelmed and worried, all of which can be very common symptoms of the menopause and can come with the hormone fluctuations around menopause. But the first thing we can think about from a food perspective is, are we giving our body the tools to do the job? Are we providing our brain with the nutrients that helps it keep on an even keel so that you are feeling calm and happy? Because calm and happy is great, and that's what we really all want.
So what would my good diet look like then for my good mood?
Well, I think the first thing to think about is, what does the brain need? And it's important to understand that the brain operates exclusively, it relies exclusively on glucose as a source of energy. So, we often think about carbs and sugar and everything as bad, but we need to remember that the brain requires that to operate. That's its only energy source. Unlike the rest of the body, it can't move on to other energy sources if you haven't got enough of that. It's only glucose. And that's why blood sugar balance is so important. Because what you don't want to be feeding yourself, stuffing yourself with high levels of sugary foods, refined carbohydrate that spike things, because that's when you're going to get quite jittery, hyper. We've all been there at times. We've seen children at parties, getting that sugar rush. It's not great, because of course when that's going on, your brain is just completely in overdrive. And equally, when your blood sugar's low, you're feeling low and miserable and tired and quite anxious about things. That's because it hasn't got any sugar there either. So getting a steady supply of complex carbohydrate, so whole grain foods like brown bread, brown rice, brown pasta, vegetables, fruits, are all good sources of complex carbohydrate. And a steady drip feed of that over the course of the day is what will keep your brain turning over really nicely and not having that crash where you're feeling miserable and actually it's not really functioning very well, so you haven't got any kind of creativity or productivity going on either.
I didn't know that my brain was powered by sugar, or glucose. So what you're saying is then keeping it at that steady level reduces the peaks and troughs.
That's right. Yeah.
At a point where it's optimized throughout.
Yeah, exactly right. Particularly for people who are prone to mood swings, the very first thing I'd look at from a clinical perspective is, okay, well, let's balance blood sugar first. Let's get that nice steady drip feed of sugar, but the right kind of sugar, and at a right pace into the brain, and that's already going to start to stabilize things.
Okay, so the things that I would be mindful of is, I travel quite a lot and I spend a lot of time on trains. And actually, when you're rushing about all over the place, or actually, if your mood's feeling low, chocolate is so easy. Or, if the trolley comes round and they've got chocolates on there, and it's almost like it's sabotage to what I actually need to be doing for my brain then.
Yeah, and I think this is where, again, that blood sugar balance makes a real difference. So what I would tend to say is make sure you're getting plenty of protein in, because protein, because it's hard to digest, it slows down the release of the sugars and the carbohydrates in the body, keeps you going for longer. So when you are stuck on that station, I would be looking at getting some protein-rich foods. So have a look in the shop if you haven't got anything in your bag. Are there any nuts around there? More and more now you can get little packs of raw nuts, things that are healthier, or maybe some seeds, and have that with a piece of fruit. Then you've got that combination of complex carbohydrate and the protein, which gives you that nice steady rush. Because once your blood sugar's crashed, it becomes much more difficult for you to control the sugar cravings, because that's when your stress hormones are released and they'll be determining your food choices and not your brain. So it's a bit of advanced actions required, really. And if you know you're going to be out and about on a long journey, then if you can have something in your bag, maybe it's, you've already bringing some nuts and seeds with a piece of fruit. Maybe you've got you can get those pre-packed things of hummus and carrot sticks. So you've got that combination of protein and fiber, because that's going to make a difference. And it's worth remembering that protein isn't just there to balance our blood sugar. It's also a key component in brain health, because the amino acids found in proteins actually are used by the body to create key neurotransmitters that regulate, amongst other things, mood and motivation. So if you're feeling quite low and lethargic all the time and just a bit miserable, are you eating protein with every meal and snack? Because that's going to be very important.
Right. Okay. So when you say complex carbs, because I don't cook, I rely on my husband to tell me that. So what would be the list of good mood foods? Is that right? Good mood foods. Yes. What would be the list?
Well, the complex carbohydrate is things like brown rice, whole grain pasta, wholemeal bread, vegetables, fruits with an edible skin, because there's more fiber in the skin, so you'll get the better benefit there. And then you combine it with protein-rich foods, so things like meat or fish or eggs, lentils, chickpeas, beans, hummus, nuts and seeds, quinoa, all great sources of protein. So it's that combination that's the thing, because that's sort of the very first thing you need to think about. Get the blood sugar balance right, so you've got the steady supply of glucose and the proteins both slowing down the release of that glucose so it's nice and steady, but also providing the action for your neurotransmitters so they fire up correctly.
Thank you. And we've had a suggestion, this is from the wonderful Mandy, around grenade protein bars are lovely.
Oh, jolly good. That's a brand I don't know, actually. I'm going to take a look at those, but really good. If it's, you want something that's got good 7 or 8 grams of protein in there in the bar or the ball or whatever it is you're buying, and that's going to be a really good thing to keep you going.
So
it's not the only thing.
Not the only thing. So have that little supply in my handbag so I don't get tempted. But somebody was saying about, because it's important to listen to your body in understanding how you're getting on with this. What about for those that feel the crash, 2 to 3 in the afternoon? Would you say that's then down to, can you up your protein at lunchtime to keep you going?
Absolutely. You need to look at the balance of your lunch, because there simply won't have been enough protein or enough complex carbohydrate in there. If you're having a sandwich, then it's got to be wholemeal, and then not just like the pathetic meal deal with one thin slice of ham in there. It's got to be chunks of chicken, chunks of hummus, or falafel, for example, if you're on a plant-based diet, and then 2 vegetables. spinach and tomato, lettuce and cucumber. So it's actually, you know, something that's really nutritious and it's a proper meal. Or if you were having soup, it would need to be not carrot and coriander or tomato, no protein there. It would need to be tomato and lentil, chicken and vegetable. So start to look much harder at what you're having at lunchtime. Is a quarter of that meal protein? Because if it's not, then the chances are you'll crash at 2 to 3 p.m.
Okay, so a little question around those of us that are menopausal, and because a lot of what you're saying, I think, is general advice, isn't it? You know, this is when you're talking to us from a nutrition point of view, kind of by our age, we should know a lot of this stuff because it's what's good for you throughout life. How is it different during the menopause?
Well, I think you also need to focus on other nutrients as well. That's just what I've just said there is the absolute basics. If you don't get that bit right, there's no point in focusing on anything else. So do that first. I always think women need to be thinking much harder about B vitamins. We burn through our Bs, particularly in our 40s and 50s, because they are depleted by stress. They're also depleted by alcohol, I'm afraid to say, even if it's just a civilized glass every night. Now, a deficiency in B vitamins, there's tons of research around this, directly associated with low mood and depression. So particularly issues around vitamin B1, B5 and B6 can be problematic. And vitamin B12 is actually directly associated again with low mood, depression, anxiety, and also cognitive issues around memory and concentration. Now, for the most part, B vitamins are found in small amounts in most foods. So if you're balancing your blood sugar and having the protein fiber combo, you'll be getting in the B vitamins without really thinking too much. But vitamin B12 is only found in animal foods. So if you're on a plant-based diet, then there's a good chance you might be low in B12, and that's a direct association with issues around low mood and mood disorders. So you would need to be getting a blood test from your doctor. You might be requiring supplements. Now, there are a couple of foods like Marmite or certain breads or breakfast cereals that fortify with a bit of B12. But it's just worth knowing that if you are feeling very tired, because that's a classic symptom of low B12, and your mood's all over the place and you can't focus and concentrate, that it would be really worth looking at that. The B vitamins are a family and they work in synergy with each other. So generally a deficiency in one is likely to lead to a deficiency in another.
That's really interesting. And if you mentioned about going and talking to your doctor about that, can you supplement yourself with this? Is this one of those vitamins where you can have too much?
Well, you can get vitamin B complexes, which has got a bit of everything in, and by and large, they're very good. But if you're taking any medication, you should always check in with your doctor first, because nutrients in supplement form, you know, they are highly concentrated and therefore they can sometimes interfere with medication. So always ask the question before you start. But otherwise, as long as you're good to go, then yes, respect the dosage on the label and it could be very helpful.
Thank you. And you know, in terms of somebody was just saying that in the chat around irritability.
Well, that leads, yeah, that's classic. And that leads me neatly to the next nutrient we need to think about, which is magnesium. Magnesium is nature's calmer. It really helps to regulate the body's response to stress, help us feel much better equipped to cope with the challenges of daily life. And actually, it's also something that can influence our pain receptors. So people who are struggling with chronic pain often find that magnesium can be incredibly helpful. It's a good one also for headaches because it regulates the tension around blood vessels and muscles that can often cause tension headaches. So I would be saying for menopausal women, 2 or 3 handfuls of leafy, dark green leafy vegetables every day. So spinach, rocket, kale, watercress, cabbage, broccoli, all great sources of magnesium. And it really is a bit of a game changer in terms of mood and motivation and that sense of jittery anxiety that we can often get with the menopause.
Are you going to tell me to take a magnesium bath?
Well, you know, it's one of my favorite things. You know, if everybody's thinking, no way am I going to eat that much green veg, which you really should, then an Epsom salts bath. Epsom salts is magnesium sulfate. You can have a foot bath if you don't like baths. 2 or 3 handfuls, soak for about 20 minutes, and the magnesium absorbs through the skin, and really helps to sort of calm the nervous system and help you. So I think it's a great shout, a bit of magnesium. But there's more.
There's more, yes. And actually, I can see that people are giving each other tips around here around, actually, does vitamin B supplements affect your ability to go to sleep?
Yes.
Is there a better time of day to take them?
Yes, I often recommend you take them in the morning, because B vitamins, one of the things they do aside from help regulate our mood is that they are the links in the chain reaction of energy production. So they can get you a bit fired up. And some people, if you're sensitive, will find they could be disruptive. So I normally recommend people take them in the morning. Not everyone is hypersensitive, but if you've observed that, then definitely it's a morning option for you.
That's wonderful. And one of the things, it kind of just nipped out of my mind. Vitamin D is a hormone, isn't it? And I know even in sunny climates, because we all slap on the sunscreen, vitamin D can affect your mood.
Yes, I mean, the increased level of research around vitamin D is really interesting now. It's much more than just our bone and teeth vitamin. It behaves more like a hormone because we actually produce it in our body through exposure to sunlight. It's not something that we ingest separately like every other vitamin. And there's some very interesting research now around mental health, low mood and depression. So we should all be taking vitamin D, there's no doubt about it, throughout the year, summer or winter, because you're quite right, Deborah, sunscreen actually blocks the impact of the UVB rays, protects us against skin cancer, which is really important, but it will also affect our ability to produce vitamin D. So we should be looking at supplementing it. There's no doubt about it in my mind.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Jackie. And as tempted as I am to mute you in this next bit, what should we be avoiding?
Well, I think things that disrupt the brain, things that disrupt the nervous system. And I think everybody's already thinking, oh, I know what that is. It's going to be caffeine, it's going to be alcohol, and it's going to be sugar, because all of those are highly stimulating. And so they can disrupt the brain and make you a little bit hyper, but they can also, when you're in between times, if you start to become reliant on them, then your brain will sort of, crash, and then you'll be feeling low and miserable until you get your next fix of caffeine or sugar or whatever it might be. So I think really consider auditing. If you're struggling with mood, start to audit your caffeine intake, your alcohol intake. How much are you actually having? Are you having alcohol every single day? Because you would really need to be thinking about, okay, giving yourself a good night's sleep so that your body and your brain in particular, which undertakes a self-cleaning process overnight, gets rid of the proteins that have clogged it up over the course of the day. Just give yourself a break for 2 or 3 nights a week. Do you need all that caffeine throughout the day? Probably not. 1 or 2, yes, because there's nothing wrong with caffeine per se, but we're not very good at moderation in my experience. So it's really about just making sure that you have, the right amount for you, and the right amount for you can often change as you move through into menopause. So thinking, well, I've always done this and I'm fine, so that can't be the problem, isn't really relevant anymore, because everything changes about you when you go through menopause.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because this isn't directly linked to good mood food, but nevertheless, I think it's linked, because when you feel bloated, when you start to gain weight and when you don't know why, that can really put me in a bad mood. When you put something on and you just think, well, this used to fit and this feels really tight now. Does all of these stabilizing help with bloating too?
Well, I mean, bloating makes you feel miserable anyway, because you think, oh, Lord, I could get into those jeans before, but also it's really uncomfortable. And when there's anything wrong with your gut, you're going to feel rough. The gut is they're starting to call it our second brain now. There's a strong connection between digestive disorders and mood disorders. There's a vein called a nerve called the vagus nerve that runs from the gut to the brain, and it's constantly sending each other signals. So if you're anxious about anything, the alarm signals will go to your gut and you'll feel your gut tightening up. That's why you might actually need to run to the toilet if you get into a bit of a panic. And equally, if the digestion's not happy, it will send messages back up to the brain. So it's very much happy gut, happy brain. So one of the things I'd be thinking about, which can also really help reduce issues around bloating, is, are you looking after your gut microbiome, that balance of bacteria in the gut? Because there's some really interesting research coming through now about the impact of the correct balance of gut bacteria and what's actually going on with you and your moods, and a strong link to depression when things are out of balance. So eating foods that stimulate the proliferation of beneficial bacteria in the gut's important. That takes us back to fiber. The gut loves fiber, so lots of different vegetables. It also loves variety. So if you're just someone who has, oh, well, I always have spinach and tomato every day, I'm a bit guilty of that when I'm busy, they're my go-tos, then after a while your gut thinks, well, I've seen that, it's not going to stimulate me to do anything. So really rotating and having lots of variety is the way to spark up your gut. And think about fermented foods, things like kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha are really good natural ways of stimulating the beneficial bacteria in the gut.
That's really interesting. So, when they say prebiotics, is it prebiotics? Getting those prebiotics, so that can actually help as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, wonderful. How about gherkins?
I think they're pickled, aren't they, rather than fermented? I don't think it's quite the same thing. But, they're full of fibre. They're very nutritious. So stick with it.
Stick with it. Absolutely. Well, I can see there's lots of comments coming through.
Yes, everybody's very active.
I know, and supporting each other as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for that. And I'd like to invite my colleague, the wonderful Sarah, who's been reading through all of these questions to see what I've missed, Sarah.
I have, and I'm loving the support as always. So thank you so much, everybody. Yeah, a few questions to go back to, Jackie. When you were talking about those healthy snacks, somebody was saying if they need to avoid gluten and lactose, they struggle to grab that easy snack to take out and about. Do you have any recommendations for that individual?
Well, in that case, it's really all about the fruit and nuts. And I would be making sure, you can grab an apple, grab a banana, pop it in your bag, because both of those, unlike soft fruits, don't get bashed around so much, that they're quite, robust. And have a small portion of nuts with you, or seeds. And you can get, even from places like Pret a Manger, you can get those mini bags of nuts. So if you're someone who knows that you can't have the whole bag with you because you'll just eat the whole bag, then maybe look at stocking up on the small bags so that you've got a little snack bag already and you can't overdo it.
Brilliant. And someone's just saying they're a big fan of nut butters, and I think you suggested that to me some time ago. Was it the cashew nuts for protein in your porridge?
Butter. I love a bit of that. I just saw someone asked about dried fruit, and my answer is no, not really, because it's much, much more sugary. For example, a raisin contains about 4 times as much sugar per 100 grams as a grape, because of the dehydration process really concentrates the fruit sugars. Sorry.
Thank you. And a few other questions going back to when you were talking about magnesium and vitamins. Somebody was saying, can you mix your vitamins and B12 and D and magnesium? And someone else was saying, can you get B12 from nutritional yeast?
Okay. Yes, you can mix up your vitamins and minerals, because when you think about it, there's no one food that only contains magnesium or only contains zinc, for example. They're all designed to work in synergy. So in your food, they're all in there to a greater or lesser degree, depending on the food. That's why actually a really good multivitamin and mineral is the best option as a starting point, because it's got a bit of everything in and it can work together in just the way that Mother Nature designed it to work. And you're less likely to be overdoing one to the detriment of another, because you've got the right balance there. Yes, nutritional yeast often has B12 added in, so that could be an option. But I would still, if you're still struggling with issues around energy and mood, I would still, and you're following a vegan or largely plant-based diet, it is worth getting that blood test, because we can store B12 for sort of 3 to 5 years at a maximum. And so often people think, well, it can't be that because I've been vegan for a long time, but it might just have caught up with you. So really worth considering, because you might still benefit from some extra support.
Brilliant, thank you. And someone else shared that they've taken magnesium supplements and it really affected their stomach. And is that normal?
Oh, it depends on the magnesium. So
Mm.
magnesium citrate, 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 it's great if you've got constipation because it's quite stimulating for the bowel. So my guess is they were probably having magnesium citrate. If that's the case, generally speaking, I'd recommend glycinate, magnesium glycinate, because that's just as calming, but also much gentler on the gut.
Brilliant, thank you. We touched on the irritability one earlier, but someone else asked about any suggestions for when you've got low testosterone levels, and then someone else has just popped in, any suggestions for any aching joints and muscles? So food or vitamins, Jackie, on both of those, what would you suggest?
Well, I mean, with testosterone, it's pretty tricky because ultimately it's been on the decline since we were about 25. It's not sort of crashing at menopause in the same way as our hormones are. So it's a gradual reduction there. But it's really going to be all about making sure that you're getting that balance of blood sugar, first of all, because what you don't want is essentially when your stress hormones come out, they interfere with your sex hormones, whichever sex hormone it might be, and that would include testosterone. So the first thing to do is balance that blood sugar. But I'd also be looking at zinc, because zinc can really help. It's why it's one of the ones that often features in men's multis a lot at a higher degree, because it does support also testosterone production. So I would look at that in your multivitamin and mineral. And then I think, was there another question? Oh, joints. Well,
the joints.
Vitamin D, first of all. Definitely vitamin D. A good 3,000 international units a day would be the first thing. After that, start to look at inflammation. I didn't actually mention omega-3. I've realized I've crossed most things out on my little list there, but omega-3, the brain's made of fat. So it needs good levels of omega-3 to function correctly in terms of the nervous system and what's going on with our neurotransmitters. But omega-3 is also highly anti-inflammatory. So things like oily fish, sardines, salmon, mackerel, for example, great sources of omega-3. Or if you're on a plant-based diet, flax seeds, probably the top one, walnuts, fantastic source of omega-3. So look at doing that, avoiding the more inflammatory foods like red meat and cheese, for example, and looking at more anti-inflammatory oily fish, vegetables, whole grains, for example.
Super. And going back to the teas, Jackie, when you were talking about, that you're not having caffeine, somebody was saying, is it okay to drink lots of decaffeinated drinks?
Well, I don't actually always love them. I mean, because they are they're often highly processed. I mean, the odd one here and there, fine. But if you're having several a day, it is just worth taking a look at the packet and just finding out quite what's in there and what the process that it's gone through is, because they're not always fantastic. But in small amounts, it's basically fine. It just comes down to moderation for most people.
Yeah. And just linked to that one very quickly, someone was asking, is oat, soya and almond milk better than cow's milk? So if you do like that, in your breakfast cereal or in your tea, what would you suggest on that one?
Well, it's not about better, it's about what's right for you. Dairy is a quick and easy source of calcium and protein. And it can be great. It's also in yogurt form full of lactobacillus, which is particularly important for vaginal health as a bacteria. However, some people find that it's very disruptive to their gut, and they find actually, that they get IBS symptoms, in which case, absolutely, looking at an alternative milk would be very useful. I'm not really in the business of eliminating major food groups unless there's a good reason to do so. But if there is, those alternatives can be really useful, yes.
Fantastic.
I thought you might have written this one, Jackie, but I know you've been talking, but somebody's saying, I'm just drinking a gut healthy smoothie with kale, orange, chai seeds, almonds, ginger, lime and oats. Whenever I feel tired and uninterested, I start going on a gut diet, aiming to have 30 different fruit and veg a week. Sounds
very
like
good.
You say.
Yes. It's my challenge is the 40 fruit and veg. I run that once a year, and that's always a lot of fun. Yes, that sounds absolutely great. Lots of variety. Well done. I'm very impressed.
That's wonderful. Any other questions that you have, Sarah?
Just quick one linked to that one, Deborah. Someone saying, you know, when you talk about fruit and you mentioned fruit with skin on, someone saying, what about frozen fruit, Jackie? Is that okay?
Yeah. I mean, the skin is better because it's got the fibre, but you can get frozen berries that still have the skin on, for example. So yes, absolutely. Nutritionally speaking, they're excellent.
Brilliant.
The other thing you could consider is you can actually get things like blueberry powder, really good quality blueberry powder, and that's often a lot cheaper or pro rata because you only need a teaspoon and you get all the benefits of the blueberries there without having to spend sort of £5 for a tiny punnet.
That's wonderful. And while we're on the subject of quality, just a quick one. For those that are taking supplements, there are always going to be different qualities. Is this something you can look at on the label that says, actually, we know this is tested, proved?
Okay, well, everything that's bought in the UK is highly standardized, so it will always be safe. But there are cheaper forms of the nutrients and then there are more expensive forms. So the cheaper forms will be fine if you've got a strong digestion. You'll absorb them anyway, but they are less absorbable for people who've got a bit of an iffy digestion. And that's often the case for women in midlife, in which case the more expensive forms of nutrients would be more helpful. So cheaper forms of the nutrients would be things like sulfates, carbonates, calcium carbonates, basically chalk, for example, and oxides, all quite hard for the body to absorb. Whereas things like citrates, glycinates, picolinates are all much easier for the body to absorb. So if you were looking at a multivitamin and thinking, I've got a bit of an iffy gut, I'd like something more absorbable, just look for something that's got a citrate, whether it's zinc citrate or calcium citrate or whatever. And the others will all be good, even if you don't know the words on there, because in my experience, manufacturers either go cheap or they go expensive. They don't combine the two.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you, Sarah, for answering or for asking the questions. Thank you very much for everyone who's joining us. And I'm going to go like this with Jackie's book. Oh. You've got one as well. I keep losing that.
Very much.
Every event I go to, somebody manages to pick it up. But there's lots of information in there. And I think we've also got information on the Hempicked Menopause Hub. In fact, I know we do, of your 40 fruit and veg challenge. So thank you very much for joining us, Jackie. And we look forward to seeing you all at the next Lunch and Learn. All the very best.